Beginning of the illness. The sickness of the prophet began shortly before the end of Safar. Late in one night, the prophet went to the cemetery of Medina, known as Jannat al-Baqi, where he prayed for the dead and returned to his house. The next morning his ailment began. Aisha relates that when the prophet returned from the Jannat al-Baqi, he was suffering from a headache and was muttering, "Oh my head." The prophet said, "Nay, oh my head." Aisha, "Oh my head." His pain increased. Then, in the house of Maymunah, the prophet called his wives and asked their permission to be nursed in the house of Aisha. All of them agreed, and the prophet came out walking supported by Fadbi, Abbas and Ali. He had a cloth bound on his head and his feet were dragging as he came to the house of Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her. Aisha tells that during the illness from which the prophet never recovered, he told her, "Aisha, I still feel pain from the food I took at Khaybar. Now I feel my aorta being cut because of it." Solicitude for the welfare of Muslims. Some of the Prophet's companions came to see him during his illness in the house of Aisha. He welcomed them and prayed for their guidance on the right path and invoked the help and blessings of Allah for them. Thereafter he said, "I enjoin you to fear Allah and assign you to His care after me. I am a warner unto you from Allah. Behold, never give yourselves to arrogance and vainglory in the habitations of Allah's servants, for Allah has told you and me, as for the abode of the hereafter we assign it unto those who seek not oppression in the earth, nor yet corruption. The sequel is for those who ward off evil." Quran 28:83. Then he recited another verse, "Is not the home of the scorners in hell?" Indifference to the world and wealth. Aisha relates that during his illness, the Messenger of Allah asked her, "Aisha, what has happened to those pieces of gold?" When she brought 5 or 7 or 9 dirhams, he took them in his hands and said, "How shall I face Allah with these in my possession? Give these away in charity." Anxiety for the prayers. While the Prophet was caught in a debilitating sickness, he inquired, "Has everybody offered prayers?" Those attending him replied, "No, O Prophet of Allah, they are waiting for you." He asked someone to bring water in a pan. After being served with his request, he took a bath and tried to get up, but fell unconscious. On regaining consciousness after a short while, he again asked, "Has everybody offered prayers?" They replied, "No, O Prophet of Allah, they are waiting for you." All the people were then sitting silently in the Prophet's mosque for the night prayer. Now Abu Bakr was considerate enough and concerned with the prevailing situation that he asked Umar to lead the prayer. Umar, however, declined, saying that he, Abu Bakr, was more qualified than he was. Thus, Abu Bakr's illness. When the Prophet felt a bit better, he came out, taking the help of Abbas and Ali for the noon prayer. As soon as Abu Bakr came to know of the Prophet's arrival, he tried to step back, but the Prophet directed him not to leave his place and asked the two who were supporting him to let him take the seat by the side of Abu Bakr. Thus, the Prophet performed the prayer sitting while Abu Bakr kept standing in the prayer. al-Fadl ibn al-Harith says that she had heard Allah's Messenger reciting Surah al-Mursalat at the sunset prayer. Thereafter he did not lead any prayer until Allah summoned him to his presence. An address. Of the few occasions when the Prophet made for the pulpit during his illness, he once said while a cloth was tied around his head, "Behold, Allah gave to his bondman the choice between this world and that which is with him, so he chose that which is with Allah." Abu Bakr saw the significance of the Prophet's word, for he knew that it was the Prophet himself who had been given that choice. He broke into tears and exclaimed, "Nay, may our own lives and our children be your ransom." The Prophet then replied, "Abu Bakr, have patience and don't be hasty. Indeed, of all the people, the most generous toward me in regard to his life and property was Abu Bakr. And, were I to choose anyone to be my dearest friend, indeed I would choose Abu Bakr. But the love and concern for Islam takes precedence above all others." The Prophet also said in this occasion, "There shall be left open no door of the mosque save Abu Bakr's." Directives for kindliness to the Ansar. Abbas and company happened to pass by a group of Ansar. They saw them weeping and asked, "What makes you weep?" They answered, "We have been recalling our meetings with the Prophet of Allah." When the Prophet was informed of the incident, he came out, the end of his mantle wound round his head, and mounted the pulpit. He did not mount the pulpit again after that day, when he praised Allah and extolled him. Then he said, "I commend the Ansar to you, for, behold, they are my intimates and bosom friends. They have fulfilled their duty, and now whatever claims they have on others remain to be requited. Therefore, you shall welcome whatever is done by the good among them, and forgive those that do wrong." Last look at the Muslims in prayer. Abu Bakr continued to lead the prayer. On a Monday morning, when the people were performing the dawn prayer, the Prophet of Allah lifted the curtain of his door and kept his gaze fixed in the worshippers for some time to see how they paid honors to the Lord. He perhaps wanted to see the results of his lifelong endeavor and struggle, training and guidance. Or, perhaps, having ever been so much fond of prayers, He wanted to know how they were enthralled and lost in prayers in his absence as they had always been in his presence. What the prophet saw was extremely satisfying. For, never had the mission of any prophet been carried out to completion in that manner. It reassured him that the attachment of the community he brought up to Allah and his religion was ever durable and undying, not transient to wear away after his death. Allah knows better how delighted he was, as his companions say, when his face was beaming with joy. They relate that the Messenger of Allah lifted the curtain and kept his eyes fixed upon them, standing on Aisha's door. It seemed as if his face was an open book. He smiled and then laughed. We thought that we might be seduced or distracted from our prayers because perhaps he was coming out to perform the same. But he told us to complete what we were doing and then he pulled down the curtain. And that was the day on which he died. 295 Interdiction of Prayers at Sepulchres. Among the last words uttered by the Prophet were, Allah's curse is upon the Jews and Christians for having taken their prophets' graves as places of worship. Aisha and Ibn Abbas related that when the time for the Prophet's death drew nigh, he had a black striped sheet over him. Often, he pulled it over his face and then having felt restless, removed it. It was in this condition that he said, Allah's curse is upon the Jews and Christians for having taken their prophets' graves as places of worship. He was warning the Muslims against such a practice.